It's not like you're working on someone's heart, I suppose, but still, the complexity of it has gotten a lot greater. I wanted to get around the talk, though, about mechanics this morning. Well, I guess national mechanics might be a good point when we're talking about blueprints and the like. I am holding in my left hand today, probably should hold it in my right hand, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. This is a pocket sized publication, and these are given out for free by the Heritage Foundation. Some of you may have seen these in the past. If you've ever gone to a Tea Party meeting, they pass these out with a lot of regularity, and I've got a few copies myself, and I keep one here for my own reference. Why am I mentioning this off the top of the program today? Well, aside from radio and automobile repair, why am I mentioning this? Today, and this has been on my mind the last several days because I was watching this fellow Jeff Flake. I referenced him the other day. He's a U.S. senator from the state of Arizona, and I referenced Jeff Flake when I said he was on one of the talk shows on Sunday morning. They do all of the talk shows Sunday morning when everyone's at church. That way you can miss it. Well, it's not the most exciting stuff in the world. It's like watching C-SPAN. Jeff Flake said he was not necessarily on board with Donald Trump because he said he thinks Trump would be violating the Constitution with a ban on Muslim immigration into the United States. Folks, I'm bringing this up because there's nothing in this Constitution that says anything about a right to immigration. Nil. Nada. Zilch. Okay? On the other hand, it does talk about the government keeping people safe. And what Donald Trump actually said was he's essentially saying what I think a great many people are saying across the country. Let's figure out this vetting process and make darn sure it works because we don't want any more terrorists. So this morning, Jeff Flake was bad enough. I had to watch a few minutes of Morning Joe over at MSDNC, and I was watching a bit of Morning Joe, and of course it's dominated by a lot of liberals, plagiarists like Mark Barnacle, and a lot of other bald, old liberal white men who claim to speak for the masses and the minorities and everyone else that is supposedly underrepresented in America. And they were all having a discussion about this, and they brought up the same issues. And then this guy, Donnie Deutsch, as I said the other day, he's an advertising executive. He's not a news person by any means. And I think his last name is German for a feminine appliance, as I pointed out on Monday, chimed in and said, yeah, and it would be wrong to deport all of these people too. Well, friends, Donald Trump hasn't suggested deporting anyone. And yet here you go. Media is spinning this to make it look, and I have to apologize because the other day I played that clip on the air with Trump talking about federal debt. And he says, oh, you can print money and pay off the federal debt. We got the ability to do that. A friend of mine reminded me on Facebook, she said, now you're being just like the liberals because Trump didn't say, and I recommend that we print up money and pay off the debt. You got it? He thinks aloud. And he was pointing out factually, yes, it's true that we can print up the money and pay off the debt if we wanted to. Or they could mint a platinum coin and do it. Now, it would destroy the value of our currency, of course, devalue it, and your savings and everything else that you had would be just about wiped out. But he didn't sit there and say, I endorse this. So I'm guilty of doing this myself, but I'm watching these folks on the mainstream media program this morning, and they keep talking about these things, and they're putting words into the man's mouth that never were there in the first place. And then Joe Scarborough himself, the show is named after him, Scarborough weighs in and says, 60% of Americans think it's wrong to ban all Muslim immigration. Well, okay, 40% though do, which is still a pretty good-sized number. But let's take a look at that for a moment. Let's ask that poll question another way. How many Americans, if you as an American, do you support allowing terrorists into the United States? I think 100% of you would say no. Get it? That's what Donald Trump is talking about. He's not talking about any permanent ban. He's saying we need a better program, and until we do that, we need a moratorium. It's the exact same thing that Governor Butch Otter told me on this program last year. And governors across the country are now saying, and level-headed people across the country are now saying, we don't want terrorists here. Do we have that right? So I wanted to bring all of this up this morning. And then last night, Sean Hannity has a guest on his program on the Fox News channel. I was not up at that hour of the night. I was long in bed. But I caught it on the Fox feed this morning. It was the fellow who runs a mosque in Toledo, Ohio. And that guy was on Sean Hannity's program saying, oh, Mr. Trump is a mean man and a bad man, and he's a no good man. And Sean Hannity undressed this guy. Take a listen for a moment.
I just want Mr. Trump to be more sensitive toward this issue.
But let me ask, but isn't there implied threat there? that it makes our country less safe. He's saying either say things the way we demand, or you're going to be attacked. That's how I interpret that.
Well, my concern here that I do not want to see American Muslims paying the price of irresponsible statements made by Mr. Trump.
Well, the greater victim of
I-
hate crimes, according to government statistics, are Jewish Americans. We have the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, our FBI Director, our Assistant FBI Director, our Chairman of our House Homeland Security, Obama's former envoy, General John Allen, to defeat ISIS, have all said the following in some way, shape, or form, that ISIS will infiltrate the refugee population. Are you willing to gamble with the lives of Americans and bring people here knowing that our own intelligence community is saying ISIS will infiltrate it? I'm not willing to do that. Are you?
I'm not against the FBI or immigration
I'm asking a question, though. They
authorities.
said ISIS will infiltrate the refugee population. Until we can guarantee the safety of Americans, shouldn't we have a ban?
Then they need to do a professional work rather than make a general statement.
In other words, he doesn't care if a lot of Americans die in terrorist attacks, as long as we can fill up the country with more of his people. So all of this belly aching and whining that these people are doing, oh, they are being mean to me. I'm sorry. The fact of the matter is, we are talking about security. No other nation in the we shouldn't say that. Gosh, look at Europe. I just was watching television yesterday, and they were showing the preparations being made at the Cannes Film Festival in France. And it's a film festival. There's nothing more than that. It's an armed camp right now because they're worried about terrorist attacks. Do we want that in this country? There's the question that begs an answer. 8:15, Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And then I was watching Nancy Pelosi, yes, the Wicked Witch of the West.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it away from the fog of the controversy.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
She was on CNN yesterday, and she also gave a news conference. I caught part of the news conference yesterday afternoon where she was saying that we're being mean to immigrants. And again, there's no right within our Constitution for anybody to cross our border or even legally come here. None. Zilch. Nada. Do you have that in your heads? But she is complaining, and then she was put on the spot by a reporter at CNN at one point during a conference yesterday who said, yes, but, you seem to be a little close politically to Donald Trump, or at least you were in the past.
I also read in the paper, I read or see or something that he's contributed to me, which is not even true, but he hasn't said it.
But do you know, how well do you know him? Can you give us some backstory?
I think I met him once, yes. I mean, I know I met him once. I met him once in his office. We went there to talk about things years ago, and he was a gentleman and lovely, and all of a sudden, but it's interesting, if you try to do what they did, I mean, here's how I see it. Shrink the presidency, discredit even the birthright of the president to be president. Shrink his credentials academically in every way. Have a meeting the day you're elected to the majority to say the most important thing we can do is to make sure he doesn't succeed.
Ooh.
If you kind of shrink the presidency, then a lot more people would be qualified to run for it, right?
Oh.
And if you live in a world of reality TV, shrunken president, reality TV, there you are.
Oh, wow. Profound from the former, that's a wonderful thing to say, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives. These people are so bats. She says, I met Trump once, so I went to his office. We had a meet. Why were they in his office? Were they there getting some advice? Do we know the contents of that meeting? She said, oh, by the way, it was really nice, which, it sort of runs counter to the narrative we're hearing in media and among the American left right now about what a scoundrel the man happens to be. You can reach our program today, 736-0300, 736-0300. I want to mention coming up in the next hour of the show, Jerome County Sheriff Doug McFall will be joining us in studio for a few minutes. That's on the way. But in the meantime, your telephone calls, and you're up next on KLIX. Good morning. Here we
Good
go
morning,
again.
Bill.
Sure, go ahead. Turn the radio down and listen to the telephone.
Bill, years ago on the Mexican border, whenever there'd be a herd of cattle coming up, if their one cow had hoof and mouth disease, they not only stopped the herd from coming across the border, they destroyed the whole herd so it wouldn't infect our herd.
Well, and again, it's about security and safety, isn't it? That's the key in all of this. You know, I'm going to tell you something. People say this is nasty to say, and we shouldn't bring it up because it's politically incorrect. Wichita, Kansas. A friend of mine has been doing a lot of research into this. Wichita, Kansas, some years ago, opened up several new canneries and processing plants. My experience with all of these type of factories is that they often bring in people who are, as the left likes to say, undocumented. In other words, breaking the law, but bring them in and give them the jobs and pay them, a nominal wage and have them work the overnight so the federal inspectors don't know that they're there. I have friends who've been in the business and told me those stories. What happened within a year of all of this taking place in Wichita? Wichita had an 8,000% increase in the number of drug-resistant cases of tuberculosis, which is not common in the good old USA, but is common in Central South America. Where did that come from? Well, the scientists all said, well, we simply don't know. There must have been an introduction of it. Could it have been that the fact that you had simultaneously introduced these plants and that they hired people who were coming here from elsewhere? No. But this wouldn't be a security issue, and to bring it up in the first place would be mean-spirited. We as Americans should welcome drug-resistant tuberculosis. It'll be good for us. After all, with our white privilege, if it kills us all off, it'll be justice for the planet, now won't it? And our carbon footprints will be erased. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. More coming up on this subject. I was driving home the other day after I left work, and I had the Rush Limbaugh program on my radio, and he was referencing a writer by the name of Victor Davis Hanson. And long before I ever read anything that Victor Davis Hanson wrote, I used to see him a lot on the History Channel because he's a history professor at Stanford University. There's something called the Hoover Institute there, and he teaches history, and he's one of the talking heads on a lot of these history documentaries that you end up seeing on TV. And then I discovered that he writes a lot for big publications around the country, National Review, the Washington Times, and the like. And Rush was mentioning that he had an opportunity to share with the audience a Victor Davis Hanson column, and he said it was really, really good. But then Rush says, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, which is, I try to avoid doing that too, because that'll take forever, and reading something is not the same as talking about something. And then he said, and I haven't had time to take out my yellow highlighter and highlight the portions I'd like to read to you. And I thought, he does the same thing I do, because I get out a yellow. And, hey, we don't come from the same school. We do the same thing for a living. He does it obviously in a much more spectacular fashion, and he's paid a lot more money for doing it. But it struck me that I do the same thing when I'm looking at something. And I've got a piece here by Victor Davis Hanson, and very much I've marked it up too with my highlighter today. But before I get there, I want to mention to you quickly, a week from tomorrow, I'm going to be joined on the air by Dr. Eric F. Jones. Dr. Jones has an office not more than a few blocks away from our studios here at KLIX. He uses a holistic, systemic approach to wellness, and he's been doing this now for 23 years. He has a master's degree and a doctorate degree in marriage and family therapy. He's also a chiropractor. The man has an incredible background. I never had the patience to get through that much school. I'll tell you what, if you can do that, God bless you. Dr. Eric F. Jones uses methods of alternative healing such as naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual cognitive self-regulation, and naturopathy to help remedy and manage mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges. He's currently accepting new patients. Now, you can also, he does evenings and weekends too as well. Saturday, anyway, we should say. His telephone number, 208-731-7178. And I got a note earlier this week that he has a new Facebook page. And the name is Eric F. Jones, Ph.D., Mental Health and Wellness Therapist. And he'd be glad to have you check out the page because he has a lot of details there about various things that he's been working on and that he recommends for patients as well. Victor Davis Hanson has this. He says, elites can afford looser immigration policies. This is at the Washington Times today. And the numbers he's coming up with, I'm not really astounded by. You figure what you see happen on the local level and then times that what happens across the country. $25 billion a year in remittances leaves the U.S. and goes to Mexico each year. It says the Mexican government worries more about that than they do the country's number one source of foreign exchange, than it does about its low-paid citizens who are in the U.S. scrimping to send the money back. It also excuses, he says, the Mexican government from restructuring the economy or budgeting for anti-poverty programs. He says the Mexican government sees the U.S. the way that 19th century elites in this country saw the frontier, a valuable escape hatch for the discontented and the unhappy. And he says American employers in a large number of industries, we talked about some of those just a short while ago, they favor illegal immigration because it keeps wages low, so it's good for business, at least for their personal business. He says the additional social expense associated with millions of illegal aliens, and he uses undocumented, I guess, to keep the politically correct happy. Politically corrupt, though, might be a better description, right? He said that would be rising health care, legal education, and law enforcement costs is usually picked up by public taxpayers, not by the employers. And he said they favor lax immigration policies because they claim we need the melting pot. But he said if the borders were closed to illegal immigration, then being Hispanic would soon be analogous to being Italian, Greek, or Portuguese American in terms of having little value in predicting one's political outlook. Aha. So down the road, some of them might actually become Republicans. And some people don't want that to happen. And he also says high-income American elites likewise have largely favored illegal immigration for a variety of predictable reasons. The professional class likes having low-wage help to clean the house, cook meals, help take care of kids and elders, and tend the lawn. Such outsourcing usually is not affordable for the middle and lower classes. And he says elites have ways of navigating around the downsides of illegal immigration. They can avoid crowded schools and low-income neighborhoods, and they can easily pay the higher taxes that can result from illegal immigration. Support for lax immigration policies, he says, also offers, and this one I thought was interesting, psychological penance for essentially having a life of apartheid. I remember years ago being on a radio show and having a discussion about this, and we got some callers who were nasty and rude and said, oh, we can't stop these people from coming here. We have to take care of them. It's the right thing to do, as if they have cornered the market on what is right and wrong in this country. And then I got a call from a fellow who identified himself as he'd worked at the Justice Department in Washington, and actually he'd worked there under Robert Bork in the 1970s when Bork was working there in the Nixon administration. And he said to me on air, he said, look, the people who clamor the loudest about why we need to do this are the people who live in gated communities. He said, they're not living next door to illegal immigrants. So they don't see what the rest of the public has to see with all of this. And at the very same time, I had a girlfriend, and she had purchased a house. She had moved from a big city to live in the country. She'd purchased a house, and within a year, the neighbors next door sold the house. It got rented to a lot of these fellows who were working in the local chicken processing plants. And do you know what racking is? That is where a guy, hot rack is what they call it. There were 3 shifts of them coming into the house. There were 15 or 20 of them living there, and they would sleep, and then one would get up and go to work, and somebody else would take the bed, and they'd sleep there. And she said they used the backyard as if it was a toilet. She eventually had to build a large fence of her own just to avoid looking at it every day. That's what we're dealing with, folks. And that's what the elites don't deal with, which is why they tell the rest of us, what are you complaining about? Hey, we've got a short break coming up. A little law enforcement talk on the way on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com.